let's get into chapter 9, which is talking about inflation. So, inflation is going to be a pretty interesting topic because let's say inflation in Zimbabwe is a really uh, good example of how inflation could be pretty bad. Like, for instance, in Zimbabwe, they have this $100 billion bill. And that seems like a lot of money, right? But in fact, there were even bills issued with a face value of 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. So they were actually having bills that had $100 trillion written on it. But when we actually look at the actual value of them, it was 621 million Zimbabwe dollars was $1. So basically, because of the political or because of some other economic factors about the Zimbabwe government and how they were affecting the currency, inflation just got way out of hand, and the value of their dollar just plummeted. It was crazy. Okay, and that was the power of inflation. So inflation is a general, ongoing rise in the level of prices for the entire economy. So basically what's happening here is that it's not every price that's going up. Like, that's not what it is. But it's more of most of the prices for most of the markets. That's what we're talking about. If most of the market is changing to where the prices are higher, that is inflation. It does not have to be all prices. All right, it does not infer to the change in the relative individual prices. It has to deal with most of the market. So it does not have to be all prices. But it does have to be most. If we're looking at most of the economy and most of the economy has higher prices, that's inflation. And what we're really looking at is, because sometimes it could be kind of confusing if we're looking at the price of rockets and the price of apples, right? Is there inflation happening? So we like to keep it simple and looking at a basket of goods and services. So hypothetically, we're going to take a group of goods and services and put them in a basket. And we're going to basically have a certain amount of quantity that we're buying. And each one of those are to represent a typical set of consumer purchases. So if you were going to the grocery store and you typically buy apples, bananas, meat, eggs, things like that, well, that's going in the basket. And some other typical things that you buy: house, car, entertainment, right? The typical things that you have as a consumer, we're going to put those in the typical basket of goods and services. So this is what we're going to be using to calculate the price level, by looking at how the prices of these items change over time. Okay, so you have your basket of goods, like literally can look at it as the HEB basket, and in there you have a house, you have a car, you have eggs, you have entertainment, you have all these things in the basket. Okay, now if that basket didn't change and we were to look at that same basket over time, the prices of those same items would show you how inflation has happened. Okay, because they're the same good, right? So the value of them, right, didn't change, but the prices of them did. So because the value of the actual apple, same apple, okay, but it's more expensive, this extra here has to be the inflation. Okay, and they are computed on a weighted average. A weighted average is basically showing you like the importance of certain goods. So if something is more important, then you're probably going to have more importance or more weight on that. Something like housing is pretty important, so we would have more weight assigned to that. So we really want to see how the prices of houses are changing the price of the basket. So they are going to be computed on a weighted average. Not everything is equal. You wouldn't want the same weight of an apple to a house. Like, they're two different goods, so you want to have different weights assigned to those different things. So what we're going to do is we're going to have what is called a price index. An index is basically, it's going to give us a number, a unit-free number derived from the price level of a number of years. Okay, so which makes computing inflation easier. So basically, in trying to look at, the price of a house of $350,000 and the price of apples, which are $1.97 a pound, completely different numbers there. It's kind of hard to measure the inflation. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an index. We're going to look at everything in one basket and create one number to illustrate what is the cost of that one basket. So there are no dollar signs or units attached. Okay, basically what's going to happen here is we're going to get an index of 105. And this 105 is basically going to tell you where are the prices. Are they changing or not? Okay. And so that's why we have a base year. A base year is an arbitrary year whose values as an index economists define as 100. So basically what's happening here, back in 1986, okay, when we, let's say we started at 1986 with the house, car, entertainment, all those things in the basket. So if we started with that basket in 1986, so here's your basket, and the year is 1986, 1986, and we were to have that same basket in 2023, we would say this basket is 100, like as a base value of 100. Where does this one go? Let's say this one is 222. So basically, the index of the basket has increased. In this increase here is the inflation. So the base year is basically saying, hey, starting from here, where are you going? Okay, are you going up or down in prices? Indexing allows easier for eyeballing the inflation numbers for different years. Like, it's easy to see going from 100 to 200 that you're like, okay, there had to be inflation. Now, when we're actually calculating the inflation, what you're going to be doing is new minus old divided by old. Okay? You're going to be doing the level in the new year, new, minus the level in the prior year, old, divided by the level in the prior year, so old. So new minus old divided by old. This gives us the percent change or the inflation. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're creating an index. And one of the indexes that is most common is called the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, a measurement of inflation that the U.S. government statisticians calculate based on the price level of a fixed basket of goods that represent the average consumer's purchases. So you, as an average person, going to H-E-B, buying your different goods, buying a house, buying a car, what is the value of that basket? Okay. Now, the value of that basket over time. So the CPI is basically looking at the value of the basket and making it an index. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're looking at the value of that basket here, the value of the basket in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. What's the value of that basket doing? And that's what CPI is. It's that same basket of goods changing over time. And we're using an index. Okay, so we're going to have a CPI of 110, 225. Okay, that is going to show you your inflation. So basically, if in the year 2021 and we had a CPI of 110, and then we had a CPI of 2022, which was 125, and I asked you to calculate the inflation, what you would do is you would do new minus old divided by old, and then you can multiply by 100 to basically make this a percentage. So what you would do here is you would do 125 minus 110, and you should get 13.64. So this would be your inflation rate from 2021 to 2022. I can give you the CPI, and you can tell me what is the inflation rate. Okay? So CPI is the one where you are looking at consumers. Now it is not perfect, so we will have some issues with it. One of them being the substitution bias. So basically what's happening here is that when we're doing the CPI, we're looking at the typical goods and services that you buy. So let's say the typical person buys Coca-Cola, okay? But in reality, if Coca-Cola were to be more expensive, what would people most likely do? They probably won't buy Coca-Cola, they'd probably buy something else. Or maybe they wouldn't buy soda at all. So substitution bias is saying that the CPI would calculate the increase in the price of Coke. But in reality, you're not buying Coke. So the inflation rate calculated by the fixed basket of goods over time tends to overstate the true rise in the cost of living. Okay, so basically the CPI is going to say, hey, Coke is more expensive, inflation's going up. Okay, so that's the CPI. But the cost of living would say, well, no, they would not buy that one, they would buy the cheaper one. Okay, so because you're buying the cheaper one, your cost of living would be maybe the same, maybe it wouldn't change. So therefore the CPI will overstate the true rise in the cost of living because it does not take into account that the person can substitute away from goods whose price rise considerably. So because price of Coke is higher, you do less Coke, more Pepsi. But the CPI is saying, no, you're buying more Coke. Or you're buying the same amount of Coke at a higher price. There has to be inflation. And that's just not true. Okay, so CPI is not able to calculate this substitution. So substitution bias will overstate CPI. The other one is that it will not account for the quality, or it won't count for the new goods. So what's happening here is that inflation calculates the fixed basket of goods over time. Okay, fixed basket meaning it doesn't change. Now, this will overstate the true rise in cost of living because it does not account for improvements in the quality of existing goods or the invention of new goods. So, for example, back in before the air conditioner, okay, like the air conditioner was invented in like the 1950s. So that would be a typical thing bought by a consumer. But it was not added to the CPI until the 1960s. So they went a long time before they finally added it. So that was a situation where they did not have the new goods. So new goods bias or quality. So if we're looking at quality, some goods will be cheaper because of a higher quality. Maybe they're able to do it. Maybe a company's making something cheaper because of technology. So there would be a decrease in the price, right? So that would show you a change there. But CPI is saying, nope, it's fixed at this price here. So it's going to be overstating those as well. So quality and new goods bias, same deal. Because of the fixed basket, it does not account for the improvements in quality or the invention of new goods. Now here are the weights of CPI, which I mentioned before. So housing is going to be pretty important here. And housing represents 42% of the CPI. So most of the weight in the calculation of CPI is calculated towards housing. The next highest category would be food and beverage, which is around 15%. So in terms of importance of the CPI, housing 42.4%, and something like food and beverage, which is also pretty important, it's going to be 15.1%. So that's why we have a difference, because there are different prices for these things. So we're going to have a different weight associated with them in order to calculate the CPI. Okay. We'll continue our conversation with CPI in the next video. I'll see you there.